Good morning, everyone. It is Friday, March the 12th, 2021. It is currently 9:56 a.m. Central Time. And yes, do I just do my normal introduction? I know I kind of fall into a pattern of the way I introduce every episode. I give you the date and the time and the year, and I do that. Now that I don't apologize for doing that. I don't apologize for doing that. Because I know that once I post an episode, it's there. It's there for as long as, we have a podcasting platform, right? It's there. And when people go back and listen to something, let's say 6 months from now, a year from now, they listen to an episode, I want them to know the date, the time that was recorded, the date and time that aired live, so that any references I make that may be dated at that point, they understand the context. They understand the historical context of what I am referring to. So I do that. I like knowing. A lot of times I'll listen to a sermon and I'll be like, I wonder. See, they made a reference to that. I wonder when this was preached. And then sometimes I can figure it out and sometimes I can't figure it out. So I just like knowing the date and all of that. So that's why I start that way. A lot of people have asked me, why do you always start that way? Well, because I'm literally live on the air right now, this Friday, March the 12th, 2021, and it is now currently 9:57 a.m. Central Time. That places kind of a historical timestamp on everything we're going to be talking about. And that's why I do that. And sometimes I'll tell you where I'm coming to you from, just to kind of give you a mental image. Oh, he's sitting inside his church there in Ovalo, Texas. And if you want to look up on Google Earth, Ovalo, Texas, fine. The only thing you're really going to see is a big white building next to a very, very, very little small post office. And well, that's the big white building. That's our church. Okay. There you go. There's Ovalo, Texas, right? There's no traffic lights. There's no stores. There's no gas stations. And I'm telling you, we're in the middle of nowhere. So that's why I do that. Someone just sent me an email a few minutes ago about, because they were responding to the episode I did yesterday, just kind of give you some basic information about podcasting, microphones, the laptop we use, the reason I like doing live broadcasts instead of recording, and they were giving some of their thoughts. And I do appreciate them responding to that episode, because when I got in the car to drive home, there was a part of me that said 45 minutes of talking about all of that was a waste of time. I really wasted my time. So the fact that the person engaged with that episode was very encouraging and just made me feel like I didn't waste 45 minutes. You never know. You never know when you turn on the microphone. Am I accomplishing something or am I just wasting time? So maybe in this episode, I'm going to be wasting time. I don't know. You can, now wait for it, transition. Now I'm transitioning. There are times you can deceive yourself. You can have this self-delusion that what you're doing is so beneficial and that you're accomplishing so much, when in reality, you're not doing anything. But at the same time, you can go the opposite direction and almost have this self-delusion that everything you're doing is a waste of time. You're not accomplishing anything, and that's not necessarily true. And trying to have an actual correct understanding of what you're doing, what's beneficial, what's not beneficial, what should you keep doing. I can't speak for all podcasters. I can't even speak for all pastors. It is a difficult thing. It really is, because I've heard sometimes you'll have those people. I can only give my experiences from being a pastor and talking to other pastors. Sometimes you listen to pastors and they really seem like that they're delusional. They're like they've completely deceived themselves and thinking, oh man, the people love this and all of this is happening, and you kind of look and you're like, I don't really think it's going the way you think it's going. I think you think people are hanging on every word you preach, and I think you think that everyone is going home and doing everything you said in your sermon, and I think you're deluding yourself. Everything's going wonderful in my church, and you're like, no, I think your church is on fire, and you don't realize it. So there is being self-deluded in that way. But then there's the other danger where you're just like, you know what? There's no point in preaching anymore. No one's listening to anything I say. It's a waste of time. And I tend to go with the negative. I always tend to go, my self-delusion is always in the negative too far. Now, maybe sometimes I'm more accurate, but my view sometimes is like, you know what? Why even do podcasting? Nobody's listening. Why even try? Nobody cares. Why am I even preaching anymore? Nobody's listening. Why do I even post my sermons online? And I can go that far to, I at times want to give up. But it's very difficult to have an accurate perception. It really is, because either you have to rely on the emails you get. Well, that can be very troubling, because sometimes in a week you'll get 60 negative emails telling you that you're stupid, an idiot. They hope you die. They hope your family dies. You're a moron. You don't know what you're talking about. And that gives you a perception that everyone hates you. Or you can have a week where you get 50 positive emails and everyone says you love you. And then you're going, yeah, look at me. Woo-hoo. And next thing you know, you're arrogant and prideful. And that's not good. Having a correct perception is difficult. In the military, they used to tell me, and I hate this saying, but they used to tell me, perception is reality. Perception is reality. And I understand that there's a truth to that. The way you perceive things becomes your reality. But I would always say, no, reality is reality. Either my perception is correct or my perception is false, but my perception doesn't determine reality. But I understand what they're saying. If that's the way you perceive it, then that becomes reality to you. If I perceive that, you know what? Why continue working through The Imitation of Christ by Thomas A. Kempis? The book is just sitting here, so that's why I'm using it as an illustration. Why continue working through this book? One person in Tennessee likes the series. That's it. One person in Tennessee. Yeah. Why am I continuing working on that series on the Sermon on the Mount? Basically, why? One person in Nebraska seems to be engaged in that series. See, I can't judge it off that. I can't. I have to have a different way of perceiving what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. But we can be self-deluded. We can have self-deception. We can deceive our very selves. And from a Christian perspective, this is very important, because the Christian perspective starts with a very fundamental worldview when it comes to self-deception. And that is that your heart and my heart, listen, is wicked, that our heart is wicked and deceitful above all things, that the human heart is wicked and deceitful. So our heart is think of it as it is a device that pumps out self-deception. I know the heart has a physical thing of pumping, blood through the body. I understand that. But I'm saying that I think in a sense, from a Christian perspective, if we really think about this, we believe that the Bible is we believe, according to the Bible, that the human heart is an instrument that literally pumps out self-deception. It is deceitful above everything else. The most deceitful thing in the world is your heart and my heart. So that means we probably live a large portion of our lives self-deceived. And that troubles me. All right, that bothers me greatly, because as Christians, we believe there is something called absolute truth. And that truth is beyond us, transcendent to us. And we want to see things in the light of truth. I want a true understanding of the world around me. I want a true understanding of self. The Bible is helpful there, because the Bible does give the truth about me, that I'm a sinner, that my heart is deceitful above all things. The Bible gives me the truth about myself, even if I don't see it, even if I don't feel it, even if I don't want to acknowledge it. The Bible gives me the truth about morality, whether I don't like it, whether I don't feel it, and even if I go against it. So this idea of self-deception, I think it's a powerful thought, and I think it's something that we need to spend a little time talking about. And here's what we're going to do. On the way to church, or no, I think I heard it before church, the morning edition on NPR News, or NPR, that's the station, National Public Radio, their NPR news program called The Morning Edition. See how things go when I slow down a little bit? Yes. I'm bad at that. But that's okay. All right. So bad, Trevor. Slow down. Okay. All right. I know I talk too fast. I'm sorry. I'll slow down. Probably would be more. I don't know if people would like it more. I don't know. We'll see. Now I'll get into deceiving myself on, yes, no, I'm doing it the right way. No, I'm doing it the wrong way. All right. But I'm doing all of this on purpose, okay, because I want you to really think about this. But here's what happened this morning on NPR. I heard the morning edition, and they had a segment on the morning edition where they talked about a new book that talks about, well, self-deception, delusions that we may have. And they argue that there are benefits that come from this, that it can be a good thing. Now, obviously, this is approaching the subject purely from a secular perspective, maybe from a psychological perspective. We're going to try to look at this from a theological perspective. But I think hopefully it will be a challenge to you and it'll be a challenge to me. So let's just jump in. Let's just listen to this. And hopefully, well, I don't know where it's going to go. We're just gonna see where it goes. And if you're listening to me live, feel free to throw in your thoughts and your comments because you are a self-deceived person. I'm a self-deceived person. So let's just engage in self-deception, right? Yeah. So the theological perspective here makes this very interesting. So we're going to contrast the two, but let's jump in here. So basically, their idea is that delusion can be useful. Self-delusion can be useful. Now, we'll take this and we'll contrast it with a Christian theological worldview. Let's do this.
Many of us know we are surrounded by disinformation. We spend a lot of time at NPR making sure we tell you what's true. Yet, as dangerous as political delusions are, a student of the human brain told Steve Inskeep we depend on self-delusions in our daily lives.
Shankar Vedantam is a familiar voice on this program. He used to bring us installments from his podcast, Hidden Brain. A few years ago, he became absorbed with the story of Donald Lowry. Decades ago, this Illinois man impersonated a woman. Many women, actually. He wrote thousands of love letters to men across America, and he asked them for money, again and again. Yet some of the men who were fooled by this con artist did not care when they learned the facts.
Some of them even reported that their lives had been transformed for the better. Eventually, when Lowry was brought to trial on charges of mail fraud, some of the people came and testified in his defense and argued that the love letters had kept them from depression and suicide.
Lowry.
Now, stop right here. First question. How do I want to word this question? If deceit produces a beneficial response in your life, then does that deceit become okay? If a deception produces positive results in your life, is that deception then okay? Now, biblically, I think we can clearly articulate no. All deception, all deceit, all lies, all deviation from the truth is wrong. The Bible is emphatic on how God hates lying. God hates lying lips. God hates deception. We'll look at some of those scriptures here in a little bit. But here's a story. This man pretended to be a woman, wrote all of these love letters to all of these men, got money from them, then was found out, and some of the people were like, no, don't prosecute this person. Because those letters, they helped me with my deception. They helped me with my discouragement. They kept me from suicide. That deception ended up being a positive thing in my life. Now, yes, from a non-Christian perspective, if the deceit is helpful, then by all means deceive. Now, if you take that to its logical conclusion, how far do you take that? Hey, if your husband, if you're a woman currently listening, if your husband is deceiving you, but that deception is beneficial to you, it makes you feel better, it does wonderful things for you, is that okay? Husbands, if your wife is deceiving you, is that okay? As long as it's beneficial. If you're deceiving your kids, is it beneficial because you're deceiving them? In other words, or let me state it this way. If your deception is beneficial, is it okay? Now, you got to think about this because I think sometimes within Christianity, I think sometimes we justify some kinds of self-deception, right? Or not self-deception. I think sometimes maybe we justify some forms of deception. Well, it's probably better. A little white lie never hurt anyone. I think just let this stay the way it is because it would probably be better for everyone. And maybe it would be better for everyone. The argument isn't whether it would be better. The argument isn't whether it would be beneficial. The argument is from a theological perspective, would it be right? And the Bible is pretty dogmatic about deception, pretty condemning of it. So I just think it's interesting. They start this episode this segment with an example of a man who pretended to be a woman, wrote love letters to all of these men and got money. And then when he was busted, many of those men who were deceived said, you know what? He ultimately helped me. I thought he was a woman. He pretended to be a woman, but ultimately it helped me. It helped me with my deception, my depression. It helped me with my discouragement. So it's okay. Just let's continue with it. Think about this. I'll throw this out there just to kind of expand this, just try to advance this conversation. Just think about this. Think of how many TV shows you've watched, how many movies you've watched where somewhere within the plot story arc, a lie, some form of deception was used. And the movie seems to indicate that the lie and the deception was okay because something good came from it. Hey, they're lying, they're deceiving, but look at all the good come from that lying deception. So it's a good thing. It's a good thing. The person kept the truth to themselves in order to protect everyone else. They're the hero. Now, these are subtle ways of thinking that next thing you know creeps into your way of thinking, and then you start justifying your own deceiving and deception. But again, why? Because the human heart is deceitful above all things. We are already prone to deception. Our heart pumps it out every single day. So we deceive and we are deceived. All right, let's continue here.
The story begins Shanker's new book with Bill Messler called Useful Delusions. He says that even if we're not taken in by a con artist, we fool ourselves more often than we may realize.
Let me give you the classic example of how a delusion can be beneficial. Think about the phenomenon of parenting and what parents experience when a child is born. Nearly every parent has the experience that I had when my daughter was born, which is you believe that this child is the most special child in the universe. And of course, when you step back and look at it, you know that this belief has to be a delusion, even though for me it doesn't feel like a delusion. But there's a reason that our brains produce this delusion when we have children. Parenting is incredibly hard and time-consuming and costly and difficult. And when parents are deeply invested in their children, when they see their children as unique and special, parents are willing to invest the time and effort needed to raise children properly.
Now, did you hear that? According to what he just said, he implied that self-delusion is necessary as a parent if you're going to raise and provide for your child properly. You've got to deceive yourself into thinking that your child is the most special child on the planet. There's something here. In other words, that you've got to have self-delusion to convince yourself that it's worth the sacrifice and the time and effort to care for that child because you've convinced you're self-deluded. Your self-delusion convinces yourself. He says your brain does this. Now, from a theological perspective, we would say that the human heart inside of us internally, we can get a whole discussion about how do we separate the brain, the heart, we can get a whole discussion about that. But that internally, our heart deceives us. So are we saying that our heart deceives us into thinking our child is better, more special than it is, so therefore it's worth the time, the effort, the sacrifice, the money to provide for that child properly? Does it require that? Now, this is where you get into why do we do what we do? From a Christian perspective, we would say we care for that child and provide for that child from a moral perspective because God commands us to care for our family, to show love. So do we need a self-delusion to motivate to do that, or would Scripture be sufficient? Well, ultimately, we can get into all kinds of discussions there. I just think it's interesting that he makes the argument that one of the reasons we provide for our children properly is because of a self-delusion. That's just, hey, I'm going to call my kids today. Hey, I want you to know that the only reason we cared for you and provided for you is because we were self-deluded into thinking that you were special. And now that you're older, we realize that we wasted a lot of money, we wasted a lot of sacrifice, and we wasted a lot of time because you're not special. You're just another person like all the other people born, and we wasted all of that money. I want my money back. I want my time back. I want my effort back. Because we were self-deluded. Okay. So yeah, have that conversation with your child today. Hey, you know what? We wasted a lot of time on you. Is that why, That's an interesting perspective to throw out there. That's an interesting perspective. Let's continue. Oh, this would be fun to have a group of people talking about this subject. We could go all kinds of directions with this. Let's continue.
You're making me think also of people who might have some severe disease with a small chance of survival. They maybe would do better to delude themselves that they're going to be fine.
There are lots of examples in the realm of health that suggest that accurately perceiving our limitations, disabilities, and shortcomings might not actually be functional for us. In fact,
all right, so the next example. So we go from child rearing, right? Child rearing. Well, actually, the first example is all of these people who benefited, all these men who benefited from love letters from another man pretending to be a woman. That's the first one. The second example is children benefit from proper child rearing from their parents because the parents are self-deceived into thinking their children are special. And now next, it can be beneficial to your health. Now, this one is fascinating to me. And I have a very, very personal connection to this in this way. When Desert Storm occurred, I got put on a plane and was being deployed. Thought I was going somewhere near Iraq or Kuwait or who knows where, but our plane broke down over New York City. And we ended up in the airport. Well, first we had to stay on the plane literally for hours. And then they, because there were threats, against the military. So they allowed us to finally get off the plane, go into this little room in an airport in, I don't know what airport we were in New York City. I mean, we couldn't go anywhere, but it was like a little room. We just had to stand there. We really couldn't do anything. We'd go to the bathroom. I mean, literally, it was like, I think the room was smaller than the airplane. And then finally, they took us back to the airplane, and then we took off. Didn't really know. And next thing you know, I realized coming through the clouds, wait a minute, that's not sand. That I'm not going, obviously, anywhere in the Middle East. Where am I at? It's lots of trees and lots of clouds. What's going on? And we ended up in Saarbrücken, Germany, to do what's called a turnkey facility. In other words, a hospital is just ready for us to turn the key, pull everything off the shelves, and get it ready. And what we were there for is those who would be injured on the front lines would be ultimately transported to our hospital. We could do more, more surgical procedures and do other things, more intensive surgical procedures and intensive medical care than can be done on the front lines. Okay, so we're there, and I end up getting tasked for security detail. So I'm armed with a gun. I get put on like the top of the building, in front of the building, because the hospital was not located on a military installation. It was in downtown Saarbrücken, Germany. So we had to provide our own security, and there were threats. So we were there with guns to make sure that nobody would try to attack the hospital. All right. So it's a wonderful, boring job. Instead of doing medical work, I'm out there with a gun in freezing cold temperatures. Feel bad for me. Okay. Yeah. Feel horrible for those of us who served in the military. Okay. All right. So I say I'm self-deluded and thinking what I did was more important than it probably was. Right. Okay. So we're there, and we get told that two generals, very high-ranking generals, are coming to the hospital to see the hospital. So they go into the hospital, and when they come out, they ask me, "How long have you been in the military?" I'm like, I don't even remember at that time. Not very long. And they're like, "Oh, okay. We want the two lowest ranking, two newest members of the military to come with us." And they were going to drive us back. We were going to give us the rest of the day off and drive us back to the base where we were staying at. And so we get in the car, and the generals just start asking us questions about our medical training, what we've done, what our job is, and blah, 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 all this stuff. And they tell us this interesting study that they had just seen, that they had just read. And there was a study where individuals who had this natural kind of thinking process of, I always get sick every flu season, or I get sick with the cold. They had kind of this negative perception that they always get sick. They always get sick. They always get sick. And then they took another group of people who are like, I never get sick. I don't care. Nothing. I can be around people who get sick. And they had this mindset that they never get sick. So these two control groups, one kind of a more negative mindset that they always get sick, kind of deluding themselves that they always get sick, whether that's accurate or not accurate. That's how they perceive it. The other group, I never get sick. It doesn't matter. I never, under any circumstances. Two groups. So what do? They take the two groups, an experiment, and they expose the group that always says that they get sick, they expose them to nothing, right? They tell them that they've been exposed either to the cold or a flu, to something. And they're not actually exposed to anything. They're not exposed to one thing at all. The other side, they tell them, look, we're not going to expose you to anything, but they actually expose them either to the flu or to the cold. Guess what? The people who said they never got sick, I don't even remember what the percentage was. It was like 80% of them did not get sick. They did not get sick. The other group the groups who was actually exposed to something, right? Who was actually exposed to something. These were the people who said they never get sick. They were actually exposed to something. They didn't get sick. The other group who says, hey, we always get sick. They weren't actually exposed to anything. The ones who weren't actually exposed to anything, who had a negative mindset that they always get sick, I don't even remember the percentage. It was crazy how many of them showed symptoms and actually almost developed a sickness that wasn't really based off them they weren't exposed to anything, but because they were told they convinced themselves they were going to get sick because that was the way their mind worked. In other words, they had a self-delusion. I always get sick. And then they come in and say, okay, we're going to expose you to a virus. Even though they weren't exposed to anything, they got sick. And then the other people who were actually exposed to a virus did not get sick because they told themselves weren't. And what the generals wanted us to understand is how the mind, according to this study, was greatly involved in how you feel, how you will experience different things that happen in your military career, that the way you go in thinking is greatly important. And hopefully I gave that story correctly. So let me state it one more time just to make sure I did not mess that up, all right? Because now I'm thinking I didn't state that correctly, but I'm pretty sure I did. But just to make sure, you have a group of people who say, I always get sick. I always get sick. And they are told they're exposed to a virus that they're not exposed to, and they start showing symptoms. The other group are the people who say, I never get sick. I never get sick. They are exposed to nothing, even though but they're told that they're exposed to. See, make sure I get this right. Okay. I know I'm messing this up. So you have group number one, I never get sick. I never get sick. I never get sick. Okay. Group number one is the group that says, I always get sick. They are exposed to nothing, but they are convinced that because they're told they're exposed to something, they think that they are, and they start showing symptoms. The other side, who says they never get sick, are told that they are exposed to something, even though they're not, and they don't get sick. They don't get sick because, well, they convince themselves that they never get sick. So their mental state, in a sense, their self-delusion, is what ultimately determined whether they would get sick or not get sick. All right. And that is crazy that can work. So in that particular case, that self-delusion would be seen as being beneficial. And when the generals told us that story, one, it greatly impacted the way I tried to perceive, that so much time in medicine that when you're around people, you do realize you do have those patients. You just feel like they always get sick. They always get sick. They always get sick. And that they need medicine. They need medicine to get better. And then you have those studies where people are given, no actual medication. They're given a tablet that contains no actual medication, and they start feeling better because they convince themselves they got medication. This story can go all kinds of different ways. There's been all kinds of studies that we would talk about in the medical world over and over and over again. But what it just greatly influenced not only the way I tried to perceive myself about whether I'm going to get sick or not get sick, but it just made me start thinking, well, wait a minute. How much of my feelings about life and about different things is simply based off how I perceive it? In other words, if I convince myself a certain way, then is that the way I experience, which gets into self-delusion. So in that case, is self-delusion a good thing? Well, I think self-delusion is a good thing if you tell yourself and convince yourself you never get sick, you never get sick, you never get sick. And as a result, even when exposed to something, you don't get sick. That's beneficial. But if you're someone who constantly tells yourself, I get sick, I'm going to get sick, I'm going to get sick, and even when you're not actually exposed to something, you almost work yourself up into some kind of symptoms of sickness that are not actually derived from any actual medical cause, it's your mind. That is that would mean that self-delusion would be detrimental. So this shows the power of self-delusion, the power of it. But again, doesn't make it right to use self-delusion, and doesn't make self-delusion right from a theological perspective, even if there are benefits that derive from it. You could argue the medical one is irrelevant, right? It's not, you could say the medical one is amoral, right? There's not a moral component to it. You tell yourself you don't get sick, you convince yourself, you may even be self-deluded into thinking that, but if you think it strong enough, you actually may benefit yourself medically. Is that a more moral thing? And I think you could argue that it isn't. Right? And I apologize that I messed that illustration up so bad, but hopefully it made sense. To my mind, I kept making it worse, and I think I ultimately made it worse, but I think I got the point across. So I apologize. That's the danger of doing things live. Okay. But it's real. All right. So there you go. All right, let's continue.
There has been a body of research over the last 20 or 30 years that has made the argument that mental health involves seeing the world through rose-tinted glasses, that when we see the world accurately, completely for what it is, we might in some ways be less functional than when we look at the world optimistically. This is absolutely the case when it comes to people who have serious illnesses, when it comes to diseases, but it's also the case for all of us right now, even when we don't have diseases. When you think about the pandemic, Steve, a lot of us have indulged in fantasies and daydreams that have allowed us to get through the horror of the past year.
What about self-deception brought you to write about Arlington National Cemetery outside Washington, D.C.?
When we think about very large things in our lives, things like the nation state, for example, it's difficult to conceive of these things as delusions. But of course, the nation really is a human invention. Nations exist because large numbers of people believe they exist, the people who live within the nation and people who live outside the nation. A nation really is a shared belief that we have agreed upon collectively. So this raises a question when we think about visiting a place like Arlington National Cemetery, where the Americans who have lost their lives in combat are memorialized and remembered. The question that arises is, why would people give their lives for something that is at its heart a human construction, a human invention? Why would you be willing to sacrifice your life for something that has been invented by other human beings? And the answer, of course, is it lies in the brain's very powerful need for connection with others, for feeling like we're part of a larger group. And so our brains are designed in some ways to form tribes with others, to form connections with others, to stand by one another. And the willingness that we have to go into battle, to die for one another, is perhaps the highest example of ways in which our shared beliefs can produce things that, in fact, are both wonderful and powerful.
You pose a troubling question here on page 157. How did a country that subjected so many people to slavery, degradation, and exploitation come to think of itself as a beacon of freedom and human dignity?
Yeah, so the founding myths of all nations are deeply complicated. And in fact, when you think about the stories and the histories of nations, this is true not just of the United States, which dispossessed large numbers of native peoples in order to make way for the United States, but it's true for all nations, which is they're often based on shared myths that we have about our past. Now, you can look at those shared myths and basically call them delusions and look down at them and say we should look at reality more clearly. But it's also the case that the fact that we think of ourselves as being a nation of equality, a nation where we live by the credo that all people are created equal, even though we haven't lived up to that credo very often in our past, the fact that we believe in that helps us move forward in all kinds of powerful ways.
What's it been like to be finishing up this book and getting ready for publication during the past year when there's been the rise of this myth about QAnon and further myths about a stolen election?
Yeah, one of the great fears that I have, Steve, is that people will read the cover of the book and imagine that I'm basically defending all delusions or saying that all delusions are useful, and nothing could be further from the truth. I do think, however, that the way we go about trying to dismantle dangerous delusions is often counterproductive. Many of us are often so upset with the content of people's delusions that we don't stop to ask the question, what is this delusion serving? What purpose, what psychological function is it serving? I believe if we asked that question, if we started the conversation with curiosity rather than judgment, if we asked people to explain why it is they believe what they believe, rather than telling them at the outset that they're wrong, I suspect we would be more effective in dismantling some of these delusions. Over the last 4 years, Steve, various news organizations have documented the enormous number of falsehoods and lies that came out of the Trump White House. I believe the Washington Post cataloged more than 30,000 falsehoods and lies that came out of the Trump White House. The net effect of all of this was between 2016 and 2020, 11 million more people voted for Donald Trump between those two elections. And I think, again, it speaks to the idea that the conventional way we think of setting people right often focuses on facts and fact-checking, whereas really a deeper psychological understanding of why people believe what they believe and a deeper empathy for the costs they would pay if they were to give up their delusions might actually get us to a better place.
Shankar Vedantam is the author with Bill Messler of Useful Delusions, The Power and Paradox of the Self-Deceiving Brain. Shankar, it's a pleasure talking with you again. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Steve.
That's a fascinating conversation. That to me is fascinating because it raises so many questions about so many things. Clearly, from the medical illustration that I slaughtered and destroyed, and now my self-deception and self-delusion is now, well, this was an absolute wasted episode, and maybe that's true, but what is truth? So now my self-delusion is actually going to be harmful because I'm going to leave here today very frustrated that I messed up that illustration. So I'm going to sit there and ponder in my brain how bad it was. I wasted my time and then get irritated, which will only lead me to wasting more time. So now it's based off part of a truth, but I'm going to take that truth and then create basically my own mythology of how people are perceiving this episode. You see how this can work? You do it in your mind. Or I could, if I would have gotten that illustration perfectly, I could have went home going, man, people are going to love that. I bet you people were challenged by that, and create my own mythology as well. We all traffic in self-deception. We all traffic in self-delusion. And sometimes we could argue that there's benefits to it and there's negative consequences to it. But it's there. And it's, to me, it's fascinating that in a sense, nations exist because all people buy into the same self-delusion about a country and about what we should do and we should sacrifice and our commitment to it. I'll use this, and hopefully I won't mess up this illustration. The same thing is true, and I think you can kind of see this in a smaller scale in many high schools. There's this idea that because you go to that high school, that it means more than it actually does. You're just there for 4 years to get a piece of paper that is only, significant in certain ways. Yeah, you need it to get into college. You may need it to get a job, but it's over. The importance of that 4 years of that high school experience to me is way overblown. It becomes romanticized that there's something brilliant and beautiful about the high school experience, and people years after sit around telling stories about their high school days. Why? What is it? It's almost they delude themselves that there's something more important about it than it is. And I never understood. I would be the one always questioning this. You realize this is all a waste of time. You realize after we leave here, no one cares that you were here. Nobody cares what you did here. It's meaningless. And you're bought into this idea that school spirit. Oh, I go to this school and our school's better than that school. And you have to root for your football team. Why? What? If you live in a certain state, you have to root for that team's sporting. You have to root for that team's sports. In other words, if you're in Texas, you have to go for the Texas Rangers and the Dallas Cowboys. Who made that rule? It's like a self-deluded idea that we convince ourselves of, and then you get a bunch of people who buy into the self-delusion, and then they all act a certain way, which now just becomes, this is the normative way which you're to live. And if you go against this, you're going against the delusion. And then you're the one who gets ostracized and thrown out because you're not supposed to do that. It's just interesting how much of our life is really built upon, in many cases, this idea of not seeing things as they really are, but seeing things through a lens of self-delusion? How much of your life is lived based off a self-delusion, based off not seeing the reality of something? How much of our Christian experience, that our ideas and many of our beliefs are not really based off Scripture? Many of the ideas of the way church is supposed to operate, the way Christians are supposed to live, how much of it is based off actual Scripture, or we've bought into some kind of self-delusion of this is the way it is? Now, Scripture is emphatic on this subject. I'm just going to go through a number of them really quick. I'm going to go through a number of them. First, the most fundamental verse when it comes to Christians in this subject would be Jeremiah 17:9, which reads, "The heart is deceitful above all things." All right. The New Living Translation, "The human heart is the most deceitful of all things." Our heart is just pumps out deception. That's the reality, and we have to try to realize that and not allow it to deceive us. The Bible has a lot to say here about deceit. And then these all come from a lot of, we could look at these up in different translations, but you'll get the idea here. There are 6 things that the Lord hates. 7 are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue. God hates lying. God hates lying. This is Proverbs 26, 24 through 26. The other passage I just read was Proverbs 6, verse 16. Proverbs 6:16. Let's see here, 26, 24 through 26. Whoever hates disguises himself with his lips and harbors deceit in his heart. When he speaks graciously, believe him not, for there are 7 abominations in his heart. Though his hatred be covered with deception, his wickedness will be exposed in the assembly. All right? So this idea of disguising yourself, deceit in your heart. Psalm 122, "Deliver me, O Lord, from lying lips, from a deceitful tongue." Deliver me from lying lips. Deliver me from a deceitful tongue. As a Christian, we do not want to traffic in lying. We don't want to lie. We don't want to lie to ourselves. We don't want to lie to others. We want to seek the truth, speak the truth, believe the truth, defend the truth, find the truth. We want to take every thought captive. We want to take every thought captive, but deception is present in us, around us. We can go along with a way of thinking that's completely literally based off a self-deception. And it's hard to, and when you're the one calling it out, everyone gets mad at you because they're like, no, don't wake us up. Don't wake us up. Don't wake us up. Don't wake us up. We are all self-deceived. But this self-deception is the correct way of thinking. You're like, I'm not so sure that's the correct way of thinking. I think some people are better at seeing the reality, and other people are more than happy. I think people are happy with self-deception if the self-deception provides them some level of comfort, some level of certainty. People like comfort and certainty and security more than they like truth and reality, because truth and reality is rarely comforting. Truth and reality is rarely makes you feel better, and sometimes it makes you feel worse. But some people long for that self-deception. So I'll stop right there. There's a lot more. There's a lot more we could say about that, but hopefully this will prove to be beneficial. And I apologize. I truly do. I apologize for messing up that illustration so bad. Oh, it's going to live with me all day. I don't know why I got that so confused. I know I think the way I stated it, I know I messed up. And then when I tried to correct it, my correction just became worse and worse and worse. And then it just became, all messed up and all confused. Hopefully somehow my messed up illustration will serve as a bigger illustration, because it will serve as a bigger illustration with me, because now I'm going to be, self-deception is going to start working on me, on how I perceive this entire episode. I'm going to have to live with it all day. And what the truth is versus the reality, I don't know. So I either have to some point just say, you know what, I don't know what the reality of it is. It's there. It's on the internet. It's going to make me look stupid. It's going to make me look foolish, but that's what it is, and move on. But we can get caught up in our own mind. So maybe it will serve as an illustration. Maybe it will serve as an illustration, because I know you have to be able to relate to it in some way, shape, or form, because you've all been there. We've all been there. All right. newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. All right, everyone have a great day. God bless.